Welcome to the Trucking Risk and Insurance Podcast, your trusted source for insights in trucking risk management and trucking insurance. In today's episode, we are joined by Dave Elniski from the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Dave is a leading expert in fleet safety and compliance. Dave's going to share valuable insights from his new book about fleet safety technology. It discusses how carriers can effectively implement these tools to enhance their safety programs. Whether you are a safety professional, a fleet manager, a trucking company owner, you'll gain practical knowledge about risk management strategies and the latest technology solutions shaping our industry. Let's get right into it right after this word from our sponsor. How to manage the safety department like an expert without the 30-year learning curve. If you want to lead the safety department like a veteran and you don't want to spend years in the hot seat learning it the hard way or decades of trial and error, text the word success to 365-364-0714. Text me now the word success 365-364-0714. Hey, Dave, welcome to the show. Can you take a second, please, and introduce yourself for our viewers?
Yeah, for sure, Chris. So my name's Dave Elniski, and I work for the Alberta Motor Transport Association and their advisor in safety and compliance. And then I'm also outside of the AMTA. I'm a PhD student at the University of Saskatchewan in public health. And that's also where I'm researching trucking health and safety. So it's all very aligned with what I do at AMTA, which is kind of help companies and individuals manage their safety programs in the trucking and busing industries.
And what I find interesting, what you just said there, was that you're working for AMTA, which is Alberta. You're in university in Saskatchewan, and you live on the East Coast. What a
Yeah,
combination.
just kind of cross Canada experience right here. Yeah, getting good at my time zones.
Well, I mean, it's really neat that we can do stuff like that nowadays. That obviously 20 years ago was never an ability. But we are here to talk about a book you recently wrote. Can you tell us a little bit? Well, first of all, what's the title? And then my second question would be, why in the hell did you even write a book?
No, fair enough. So the book's title, it's Pro Tech and Proactive, and it's a book about safety technology, fleet safety technology. I guess, why did we write it? Why did I write it? About a year ago, we were sort of just looking at safety technology and trucking in general. We're kind of like, okay, obviously there's a lot out there. It's changing all the time. It's of great interest, of course. And the organization just had questions about it, and we just wanted to improve our own kind of our institutional knowledge on the topic, kind of explore it from a few different angles, see, can we speak to its efficacy? Do we have data to talk about return on investment? Can we just describe the different types of technology for people who are new to the industry or we want to learn about this topic? So, what was originally kind of maybe going to be like a report or a white paper, the questions were broad. And as I was working on the content and I began interviewing people for the book and stuff like that, I realized there's a lot of content here. This would be nicely represented as a book. There's enough material here, and there just seemed to be a need as well for safety professionals and company owners and managers, especially in the small and medium-sized carrier brackets, to kind of use some assistance in this area, to be able to speak to safety technology using non-proprietary language, to have a presentation of the evidence to suggest what types of safety technology are effective or not, and the management practices that are needed to support it. So that's really what kind of spurred it on. It was all these questions about this topic, and I just thought I'd bring them together in one place into a book that we've now made freely accessible on our website, and you can get it on Amazon as well in paperback for cost recovery only. We don't see any revenue from the sales.
Well, that's awesome because one of the things you mentioned there, basically, that I think every owner and every safety person has to be aware of, you said ROI, return on the investment. So you've actually delved into that with the safety technologies that you've looked into?
Yeah, and really the takeaway I would have, speaking in general terms, is that ROI is not, generally speaking, a very good metric to use when evaluating safety technology. And the reason for that is that it adds a layer of complexity that we don't
Yeah.
need. When we're trying to talk about should we use a safety technology or not, we're really talking about how effective it is. Does it actually work? What problem does it solve? And then all return on investment tells us is the cost for the technology, to what degree was it offset by the cost of the problem it solved. But if we can just take all the money language out of it and just focus on the actual incident that's we're supposed to be preventing by using this technology, and if the carrier has its own data and it knows how much those incidents cost it within its own operations, it can figure out its own ROI. What it really needs to know is how effective is the technology and under what circumstances. Because if one carrier says, well, I got a 45% ROI, great. But over what period of time? What do your company do? I have to have a lot of details to actually know if I have any chance at my own operations of seeing similar results. But if you did tell me it reduced these types of collisions in these environments by 45% over a year or something like that, that's a little bit easier now for me to take that to my company and say, oh, okay, yeah, I can see where we would have those kinds of incidents take place, and now I can see how that would be useful. And so it's removing that complexity out of it and just focusing on what it is the technology itself does.
And give me an example of some of the types of technologies that you've looked at in this book.
For sure. Well, we kind of so in the book, I look at the technologies. I kind of divide them up in a few different categories. First of all, there's vehicle-based safety technology and office-based safety technology. So the vehicle-based, like automatic emergency braking, that lives in the truck. The route planning and logistical software used to manage your company, that lives in the office. Some have elements of both, like your electronic logging device has the office end dashboard and the component in the truck. Then within the vehicle, there's technology that helps the driver, and then there's technology that goes a step further and can actually intervene in how the vehicle's being driven to make up for driver shortcomings. So you might have forward collision warning will tell you you're about to crash, but you have to do something about that. Automatic emergency braking might be paired with that and tell you, hey, you're about to crash. And if you don't take action, it'll actually stop the vehicle or attempt to do
Right.
that. So there's these different ways of looking at it. So, but another big takeaway though, is that very few of these technologies are particularly effective if you also have to manage them, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
There's very few that you can just buy and see results. Automatic emergency braking might be one of kind of the exceptions because, yeah, you buy it, you spec it in your truck, and it's there. And as long as it's activated and maintained, it'll work when it's needed, and otherwise it won't. But most other technologies also require like safety management staff and other individuals to be trained on it, to use the data to make better decisions. So that's the thing for companies, is they have to have the resources internally to manage it as well, and not just expect it to do everything by itself.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest issues today in trucking safety is that the safety departments all of a sudden, and I say all of a sudden, in the last 5 or so years, probably, they've been just inundated with new data. And not many of them are trained how to manage this data effectively and what data points are really important and that need immediate action, and what data can, I don't want to say be ignored, but can be grouped together and then acted upon perhaps later, not in the same urgency. Do you have some examples of data that you might want to act on immediately?
Well, I mean, if a fleet has anything in its vehicles, any kind of telematics programs that provide critical incident notifications, then by their definition, those are things that should require immediate attention. Because if the vehicle is set up that it's supposed to notify the company if it thinks it's been involved in an accident, collision, I guess, then of course that would be something you'd want to tend
Right.
to right away. One thing where I'd say you get a lot of red herrings are with ELDs. They can give a lot of warnings that might look bad but may not necessarily require immediate action. So it's important to understand, well, what is the ELD actually telling me? But things like critical incident reporting, anything that's driver initiated, like if you have perhaps technology meant to provide workers with protections from working alone, and they have a panic button or they have some way of sending an emergency communication, well, that has to somehow be separate and like obviously visibly different from routine communications. Those would be the kinds of things. So the company would want to sit down and kind of look at that itself and say, well, what notifications are we going to receive? And which ones of these are urgent versus which ones less so, and versus also you're going to get some false positives at times too. And then how do you deal with those?
I think it's the false positives that create the most issues in getting rid of them, because you have to deal with all this data somehow. But hey,
Yeah.
if I was a carrier, how can I best decide on what technology I'm going to bring into my trucking company or into my operation?
So my advice there would be, I mean, there's a section of the book, chapter of the book dedicated to this, which is trying to decide on what strategy a company should use, or strategies based on its safety culture evolution. There's going to be some companies that are extremely sophisticated and they can, and they're large and they might be able to pilot a technology in one of their divisions before rolling it out, and they have all this structure. And then you have other companies which they might still be focused very much on just managing their compliance obligations, let alone, going further than that. I think it's very important for a company to be honest with itself and say, okay, where are we at? What are our major problems? And that's going to really inform, from that point onwards, that's really going to inform what decisions, you make in terms of what technology a company should use. But most companies, if you're federally regulated in Canada, you're doing cross-border operations, you have electronic logging devices, using ELDs probably means you also are gathering a lot of telematics data. And that's a place I recommend companies start with, is that, okay, what technology are you already using on your vehicles? What data are you already gathering? And can you just use it better? Because then without having to spend any more money, without having to install anything else, you can just see, well, can we just be better with what we already have? And for some companies, that's often the case. They've got, oh, shoot, we're gathering all kinds of information in our ELD system that we didn't really use before. Now we can put that to use and make better decisions. So that's where I generally recommend a company starts, is kind of an internal self-reflection, and then, well, what do I already have? And what can I use before going out and spending?
Well, and part of that self-reflection, you mentioned, am I a compliance-based company, or am I further down the road into really getting, I think, kind of the culture and the belief of the drivers into safety? What is the difference between a compliance-focused safety management and kind of the proactive safety manager?
Well, the big differences there would be, first of all, I mean, from an engineering perspective, like a safety engineering perspective, proactive would mean looking at a system, trying to anticipate how can it fail, and then doing things to make that not happen. So we're not waiting for things to fail. We're not being told what to do. We are actively going out and seeking problems so that we can resolve them before they actually create us any grief. So it's a different mindset. It's actively going out. Compliance is about following prescribed rules. So compliance is someone has told you this is your checklist of things to do them, and then you go and do them, and that's being compliant. In theory, I mean, if the rules were perfect, then all you'd have to do is be compliant because they tell you exactly what to do. But that's not realistic. Regulations respond to things that happen in the industry. Something in the industry changes, and all of a sudden we realize, we might need a new rule for that. Then the rule comes into play, and then we do things. But it's very difficult for regulations to anticipate. And even if the regulations said carriers shall be proactive, great. How do we do that? It still requires the company to kind of critically think at its own level and evaluate its operations and kind of troubleshoot and problem solve, whereas compliance is following an existing framework, an existing set of questions, and making sure we have what we have. So it's you have to have both. And our regulations are pretty good in the sense that like they provide a pretty good framework. If companies follow them and their intention, they're better operators than if they don't. But that only gets you so far. And further safety improvements require that proactive mindset to seek further and dig into operations to see, well, how can we be better?
Well, and of course, the insurance companies they really want you to be that proactive one. Compliance-based safety is very reactive. Somebody tells you you've got a problem, and it could be the insurance auditor. The insurance auditor could come in and say, hey, your driver files aren't up to compliance. Well, again, that's a reactive reaction if you update your compliance files, but preventing crashes is very much a different mindset. Can you get into, let me ask it this way, I guess. How does a safety manager build a new mindset that isn't compliance based, but is proactive based safety?
Well, I think when a company wants to make that transition, I guess the first place I'd recommend they start is, first of all, who's the person who's wants to make this transition. That person needs to ask themselves, am I supported by my management? Because some companies might be compliance focused and see that as, no, we want to do better, and some companies might be compliance focused but also think that's fine. So if you're at an organization where you're the safety person and you want to improve safety performance, but company management is of the opinion that, no, as long as we're compliant, we're fine, and that's really all we need, well, that's going to have to be tackled first.
Right.
But if everybody's kind of on board that, like, yeah, we need to do better, we need to do more, okay, well, then, it's a different discussion. When making that transition, generally, though, I mean, my first question is, okay, are you truly compliant? Are you following all the rules and aware of them? And do you have systems in place to also maintain that compliance, as perhaps you devote your attention elsewhere for other areas to improve? And then from that point onwards, I then would ask if they are following all their occupational health and safety obligations. So the trucking specific safety regulations, our national safety code and that sort of stuff, in Ontario, the CVOR system, safety fitness certificates, whatever the provinces call them. This is the language we're using for just one set of regulations that tells carriers about things like driver files, hours of service, cargo securement, that sort of stuff. But there's a whole other rule set known as the occupational health and safety rules, whether you're provincial or federal, that apply to your organization. And they all contain, in different, depending on the jurisdiction, requirements for companies to do things called a hazard assessment. And that hazard assessment requires a company to go through its operations, evaluate the tasks its staff are doing, to look for hazards present in those tasks, and then take action to reduce the risk to their staff. So that is a proactive activity. So really, I mean, if a company is not really even aware of its OHS requirements or isn't really following them, that's the place to focus. We've got our compliance in place. Start doing hazard assessments, because there's already a framework there to help the organization be kind of already start thinking proactively and kind of doing self-audits and that sort of stuff. That's typically where I would start anyways. And if a company's done all this and they're going quite well, then we can carry on from there and look for additional strategies.
Yeah, I mean, I run into a lot of companies that are compliant focused companies, and not many of them have done a hazard assessment of any part of their operation. How, what advice would you give somebody who wanted to start doing that?
Well, I mean, the first part, I reiterate that there is a compliance element to hazard assessments, so it's not a optional thing. But the next part is that I really do encourage people to reach out for assistance. There's lots of resources to help you learn how to do hazard assessments independently, but they are complex tasks. They do require specialized knowledge of the industry in question. So definitely a good idea to reach out for assistance. And I mean, industry associations, like every province has some trucking association you can reach out to for assistance. There's similar groups for occupational health and safety. I mean, there's lots of people out there you can get in touch with, at least as a starting point.
Yeah.
So that's typically what I would suggest, is that, you know, you have to do it, and then find a process and a system that makes sense, and don't be afraid to reach out for help, because there's lots of people that, well, you know, you'll be able to freely find the advice needed to at least be pointed in the right direction, and then decide for yourself, well, can I do this, or should I be bringing in a consultant, or do we need to staff up for this or take on training? But that's typically how I recommend. There is a lot of help out there in this industry in the form of associations, people like yourself, Chris, who are just ready to help. Just a matter of finding someone and starting from there.
And you're absolutely right. The different ways to get support, and one of them doesn't include always hiring a consultant. As you said, there's a lot of free support through the trucking associations. Here in Ontario, there is the Fleet Safety Council that does a lot of this type of stuff. I know Alberta, from my past experience with that being part of my territory, the AMTA is different, and they do have a great deal of resources. And one of them, funny enough, is a book now that Dave, you wrote. What if, when I purchase a book, what am I going to find in it? What are some of the topics that you're addressing?
So I guess so. Probably about half the book is dedicated to describing fleet safety technologies and the management practices that support them. So it could almost be thought of like a field guide for safety
Okay.
tech. You can go through the table of contents and see, okay, lane departure assistance, forward collision warning, find the page, and just we've written these one-page summaries in there, kind of targeted a general carrier audience, just to provide a description of what the technology is. And this was kind of in response to just the confusion around the language for safety technology in the industry. There's not really a high degree of standardization in how we speak about safety tech. One OEM can call their version of lane departure assistance what they want to call it. It could be different from another OEM, and there could be overlap in these systems. So part of it was just saying, okay, let's look at all the different safety technology at the time of writing that we can identify, group them into categories, and then describe the categories, describe the types of safety technology, so that we kind of have that foundation. We can kind of start to speak to these different things. So that's half the book, just very descriptive. Then the other half of it is broken up into some sections that talk about, first of all, efficacy. So how effective is the safety technology? So I did like a little review of some literature to kind of consolidate some material from studies on these types of safety technology to demonstrate, okay, well, this is what the evidence says in terms of efficacy, and then I write it out in kind of a more descriptive language to say if in general this type of safety technology is showing itself to be effective at reducing collisions in these situations. Then there's a section on return on investment. That is, and that's really where I'm more making the argument that, first of all, here's what return on investment means and how you calculate it, but also if you just focus on efficacy data and ignore the return on investment stuff, you can often get a clearer picture of what benefits the technology will bring to your organization. There's a section where I present the results of the interviews I did with some very large companies in Canada and the US on their safety culture and what they were doing, companies with very advanced safety management systems. And then finally, a section on, you know, where to start as a company, depending on where you think your safety culture's at. Like if it's just struggling with day-to-day compliance versus you're a leader in the industry, you know, what are different strategies you can take to do better using safety technology. So that's, and then you can access it. You know, we made it free on our website. We have it available on Amazon as a paperback. It's not free on Amazon. You have to pay Amazon's printing costs, but we don't collect any money from that. So it's as cheap as we could sell it, because we just want this information out there to make it available. It's aligned with our mission of helping the industry.
So you said, first of all, let's talk about the free one. You said that you can download it for free from the AMTA. Is that right?
Yep. Yep. That's
And
on our
you're
website.
and you're going to give me the link so that I can put it in the show notes down below, correct?
Absolutely. I'll give you the
That's
Amazon one too if you want to post it.
yeah. Oh, I think both are important, but for somebody who, and I believe that we are in a trucking recession at the moment, so every dollar is precious. Why wouldn't you take the free version and use it and read it on a digital platform? And of course, you could actually print it yourself if you really wanted to. The only downside to the free version I see is often we take free things and don't use them when we know, even though we know that they're very good. So don't let that happen to, if you download the book, use the damn thing. All right. What
That's a good
else?
point. Yeah.
Well, often when we pay for things, it's a commitment, is what it is. So make the same commitment to this free version of the book. Right? What else would you like to say about the book, Dave?
Well, I guess the other thing is that it is a topic this is a changing area. What is
Right.
in the book now, especially the descriptive information on the types of safety technology, it's going to change. It's going to change quickly. It's going to continue to be a complex topic. And perhaps what I would suggest to people in fleet safety management is knowing about safety technology that can support you in what you do in your profession. I don't think this is a nice to know anymore. I think this needs to be thought of as like a core competency, a core skill. It kind of stands to reason that if my job is to improve the safety performance of a trucking company, reducing collisions and improving health and safety for the workers at the organization, and there happens to be solutions that can help, and there's evidence to support those solutions, well, if I'm not aware of that, then I'm not doing my best.
Right.
Like just like a doctor needs to keep up, a physician has to keep up on their areas. Every profession has to keep up on developments in the field. And with health and safety now, in a fleet environment or otherwise, this keeping up on safety technology is important. Now, this doesn't mean you have to subscribe to every supplier newsletter. This doesn't mean you have to spend hours a day doing this, but this does mean that like every now and then, if your job doesn't involve you looking at this stuff regularly, you need to take a little bit of time and just see like what are companies doing in this space? What are the really, after all these different technologies kind of being thrown up against the wall, what's stuck? What are companies using? What are OEMs just adopting now? It might even be the case that you're speccing trucks and bring them into your fleets with features that you're getting no matter whether you want them or not, that you might have to train your drivers on. So are you doing that? So it's just become an area where, if this book is a useful starting point, fantastic. A useful aid, great. If not, whatever works for you. But it's such a dynamic area now that it really deserves dedicated attention at regular intervals throughout the year just to maintain currency as a safety professional.
In wrapping up the interview, Dave, and I want to say from the trucking industry and all the other safety managers out there, thank you. And thank you to you, and thank you to the AMTA to giving you permission to delve into this topic and prepare something that is useful for me as a safety manager. So what last thing would you like our listeners and viewers to be left with?
Well, I guess, at the end of the day, I guess from a safety perspective, safety management is a very broad field. When we look back, we look back decades, safety was a little bit more narrow in its scope. And in trucking, we're almost always talking about collisions, mainly when we're talking about safety. But safety is health. Safety is also well-being. Safety is psychological health and safety. And when we talk about making this industry sustainable, making it an industry people want to work in, an industry we're proud of, we need to look at safety as being more than just keeping our collision rates down. Are we treating people kindly? Are we producing the kinds of positions for drivers that we think they would actually want to do? I mean, I was a long haul truck driver for years myself. I know the kinds of working environments I would want and the kinds I don't. And I also know that changes depending on my own stage in life, no kids versus kids, that kind of stuff. Yes, we can get really mired down in these compliance-centric kind of details of like, well, I got to have all this stuff on my driver's file. I got to do all this, got to have all these checklists. Okay, great. But take a moment and think about the things you do for safety, and out of those things, which ones are making a difference. Yes, you have to have the right documents in the driver's file, but having documents in a file has very little to do with real world safety performance. So what were you using the documents in that file? And that's really where I encourage organizations to say is like, okay, at a certain point in time, you do want to be able to say, well, what you're doing for safety, these are the benefits we see. This is what's actually being made better. And that's how I encourage people to look at it, because it is how safety is going. Safety is more holistic. We are looking at things like how comfortable people are at work. It's not just about if we're trying to reduce fatalities on highways. It's also about making working environments where people can, by the end of their work career, not be physically or psychologically harmed as a result of being in an occupation for decades. So that's what we're looking for. We have lofty goals and we're working towards them. So yeah, see if you're a part of that or not. Yeah.
That's a great place to wrap this one up. Dave from the AMTA wrote a book about safety technology, and the link to the free and the paid versions are in the show notes down below. Dave, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Yeah, appreciate it.